Chapter 15, Part 1. Sorry, I had my volume off. I didn't hear it ding, ding, ding at me. Okay, here we go. We were sitting at the table eating when Papa looked at me and said, "If you find the monkeys, are you going to try to catch them?" "No," I said. "I just want to see if they're all right. Then I'm going to the store and have a talk with Grandpa. Hope he has something figured out." As soon as I had finished eating, I walked out in the yard and called Rowdy. "Come on, boy. Let's go," I said. The storm had raised Cain in the thick timber of the river bottom. Trees had been blown down. The game trail we were following was littered with broken limbs and leaves. Puddles of water were still standing in it. Several times, Rowdy and I had to work our way around a big tree that had blown down across the trail. "Boy, Rowdy," I said, "I don't think a ghost could have lived through a storm like that, do you? I bet those monkeys were drowned or got blown away." About every 50 yards, I would stop and listen. Then I'd call in a loud voice, "Jimbo, where are you? Come on, Jimbo." I'd stand still and listen to the echo of my voice die away in the distance. There was no answer for the monkeys, just that cold, damp silence all around us. First 2 or 3 times I called and got no answer didn't leave me too discouraged. Then a numb feeling of doubt started creeping in on me. Rowdy didn't help the situation at all. He was slipping along, excuse me, as if he were walking on porcupines. At every bend in the trail, he would stop and peek around if it before going on. His ears were sticking up and he was watching both sides of the trail. Every little way, Rowdy would stop and look up into the trees. He just knew that any minute a monkey would come flying out of nowhere, land on his back, and start chewing on him. "Oh, Rowdy," I said, "I wish you'd stop acting that way. You're making me nervous. I don't think you have to worry about any monkeys jumping on you. After a storm like that, I doubt if there's a live one left." All the way through the bottoms to the riverbank, I called and listened. Called and listened. I didn't hear a thing. Not a sound. On reaching the river, Rowdy and I stopped to watch a mother duck, with about a dozen little babies working around an old drift close to the bank. I could hear her talking to her little ones. She was teaching them how to find food around the drift. One little duck decided to do some exploring on his own. He didn't get 10 feet from his mother when she let out a peculiar quack that must have scared the little one half to death. With a baby quack, he scooted back so fast it looked like he was walking on top of the water. On reaching his mother, he shook his tail as if it was on fire and he was trying to cool it off. I watched another little duck climb on his mother's back. He sat down and started scratching his neck with a tiny foot. Across the river on a sandbar, a big blue crane let out a loud squawk. With wings flapping and long legs dragging in the water, he took off down the river. Out in the middle of the river, a big old catfish rolled and boiled the water to a white foam. Instantly, the mother duck quacked her alarm and herded her babies into the shallows. She knew all too well that a baby duck would make a good meal for a big old catfish. Rowdy and I walked up the riverbank for about 300 yards and then cut back through the bottoms. It was the same thing all over again. I called and got no answer. By the time we reached the rail fence around our fields, my doubts were getting stronger and stronger. "Rowdy," I said, "it sure looks like our luck has run out. I don't think there's a monkey around here anyway. I guess something happened to them in that storm." The next thing that Rowdy and I tried wasn't easy. We followed a game trail until we were about halfway between our fields and the river. Then we left the trail and took off right through the middle of the bottoms. It was tough going through the thick underbrush. The ground was wet, muddy, and slick. Once my bare feet flew out from under me, and I sat down so hard I grunted. Every now and then, the underbrush was so thick I couldn't make my way through it. I'd get down on my hands and knees and crawl until I couldn't stand up again. Every time I shook a bush, water would shower down. All along the way, I called and listened for the monkeys. The only thing I heard was my deep breathing, the thumping of my heart, and the panting of old Rowdy. Several times I tried to get Rowdy to get out on his own and do a little sniffing around, but he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't get 5 feet from me. Once I really got tough with him. I scolded him and even picked up a stick and made believe I was going to whip him. Rowdy knew I was bluffing. He knew I would never hit him with the stick. He just whined a few times, sat down in the mud, and looked at me. In every way he could, Rowdy seemed to be saying, "You want to go monkey hunting? That's all right with me. I'll even go along with you. But I'm not going hunting for those monkeys by myself." We worked our way through the bottoms for a good quarter of a mile. I kept calling and got no answer. Finally, I gave up. Wet, cold, and very discouraged, I sat down on an old sycamore log and buried my face in my arms. Almost in tears, I started talking to myself. "All the monkeys are gone," I said. "I'll never see them again. I'll never have a pony or a gun. Not ever." Roddy could tell that I was unhappy, and this made him unhappy too. He came to me and tried his best to cheer me up. He tried to push his nose up under my arm so he could lick my face. Then he started licking my hands. I put my arms around my old hand and said, "It's not your fault the monkeys are gone. It's not my fault either. I guess we weren't supposed to catch them. Feeling lower than I had ever felt, I got to my feet and started for home. I hadn't taken 10 steps when I thought I heard something. I stopped and listened. I didn't hear a thing. I looked at Rowdy. Usually, if anything made a racket, Rowdy would hear it and he'd let me know. His ears would stand straight up and he'd point his nose in the direction of the sound. In a low voice, I said, Rowdy, I thought I heard something. Did you hear anything? If Rowdy had heard anything, he sure wasn't letting me know it. He was just sitting there on the cold ground looking at me and wagging his muddy tail. With his friendly old eyes, he was trying to tell me, No, I don't hear anything. I wasn't listening for anything. Let's get out of these cold, wet bottoms and go home where it's warm and dry. I decided I had just imagined hearing something, and once again I started for home. I hadn't taken 3 steps when I heard the noise again. That time there was no doubt I had heard something. It was a low, whimpering cry and sounded like a small animal suffering. Rowdy had heard the noise too. His ears were sticking straight up, and he was looking toward my right. I could see his nose twitching as he sniffed for the scent. What was that, Rowdy? I whispered. It sure didn't sound like a monkey. It sounded more like a little animal that's been hurt. Let's see if we can find it. Maybe we can help it. With Rowdy in the lead, we started working our way toward the sound. We had gone about 200 yards when I stopped again to listen. For several seconds, I didn't hear a thing. Then I heard that low, pitiful cry. Rowdy, I said in a whisper. Whatever that is, it must be suffering. I bet that storm blew down a den tree that had some baby coons in it, and one of them got hurt. Again, Rowdy and I started boring our way through the underbrush in the direction of the cry. We had worked our way to the bank of a deep washout when I stopped and listened. I heard the cry again, and I could tell that it was coming from down in the washout. Catching hold of a tall cane growing on the bank, I bent it down and used it like a rope to let myself down to the bottom. I could see a lot farther in the washout. No underbrush or trees grew there, just a bunches of grass, cattails, and ferns. I stood still for a moment. When I didn't hear anything, I whooped. I was answered by that low cry. By the sound of it, I could tell that I was close to whatever was making it. I walked up the washout about 100 yards and stopped to listen. When I heard the cry that time, I almost jumped out of my britches. It was coming from right behind me. I turned around. First, I couldn't see anything. Then I saw a small pocket under the bank. Rushing water had made the hole a long time ago. Mumbling to myself, I said, Whatever it is that's crying must be under that bank. That's the only place it could be. I eased over to the side of the washout, dropped to my hands and knees, and looked under the bank into the pocket. I almost screamed. I was looking right in Jimbo's face. I just knew he would come boiling out from under that bank and jump right in my face. But he didn't. Jimbo didn't move or make a sound. He just looked at me and batted his eyes as if he were sleepy. He was sitting there with his back against the cold, wet bank. All the little monkeys were there too. They were huddled up against his body as close as they could get, trying to keep warm. He had his long arms wrapped around his little friends as if he were protecting them. Right away, I saw that the monkeys were in terrible shape. They were sopping wet and their small bodies were quivering from the cold. Chapter 15, Part 1 question. Who did I see just walk by the door? It was Mrs. McComas. Chapter 15, Part 2 question. The answer is Mrs. McComas. Holy smokes, Jimbo! I said, what are you doing in there? The storm's over. You've got to get out of that cold place and start moving around. If you don't, you're not going to make it. Come on, let me help you. Jimbo didn't move. All he did was open his big mouth and utter that low, pitiful cry. I felt sorry for the monkeys and wanted to help them, but I didn't know what to do. I was afraid they would jump on me. One little monkey looked as if he were already on his way to monkey heaven. He was off a little to one side, stretched out on the cold ground. At first I thought he was dead. Then I saw his tiny mouth open as if he were gasping for breath. I couldn't stand it. I almost cried. Before I realized what I was doing, I reached in, caught hold of the little monkey's hind legs, and pulled him out from under the bank. Taking my handkerchief, I started drying him off. I laid him down on his back and started rubbing and working his legs. I almost rubbed all the hair off that monkey, but I must have been doing a pretty good job because about 5 minutes later, the little fellow started moving. He even squeaked a few times. Still holding the little monkey in my arms, I eased over and started talking to Jimbo. Come on, Jimbo, I said, bring your little friends and let's go down where the sun is shining. They can dry out there and get warm. Jimbo looked at me and then he looked at the little monkey I was holding in my arms. I started rubbing the little monkey and talking to it. Looks like you're going to make it now, little fellow, I said. It's a good thing I found you when I did. Jimbo must have realized that Rowdy and I meant him no harm. He came out from under the bank. The little monkeys started crying. They didn't want Jimbo to leave them. I set the little monkey down on the ground, then I stood up and watched to see what would happen. Rowdy came over and started licking the little monkey with his warm tongue. The little monkey seemed to like it. He closed his eyes and let Rowdy wash away. For a few seconds, Jimbo just stood there watching Rowdy. Then he did something that almost paralyzed me. He shuffled over to me, caught hold of my overalls, climbed up into my arms, and laid his head on my shoulder. I swallowed a big lump that had crawled up in my throat and put my arms around his cold, wet body. Started talking to him. Everything will be all right, Jimbo. I said, you don't have to worry. I'll take care of you. Let's get your little friends from under that bank and take them down to where the sun is shining so they can dry out and get warm. I set Jimbo on the ground, went over to the pocket, and got down on my knees. I closed my eyes and gritted my teeth as I reached back under the bank and got hold of the monkey. I just knew that some needle-sharp teeth would sink into my hand, but nothing happened. The monkeys must have been too cold and stiff. There was no bite left of them. End of part 1.